welcome you to tonight's panel. Welcome you to tonight's panel discussion, How Big Money Smothers Conservative Voices, hosted by New Jersey State Chapter of American Promise. My name's Joan DeVore, and I'll be facilitating the meeting. Also on the host team tonight, we have two other volunteer citizen advocates with American Promise New Jersey, Marie Henselder-Kimmel and Carolyn Rush. Just give a little wave there. And American Promise is a network of citizens across the country and across the political spectrum advancing a constitutional amendment to limit the influence of big money in politics and restore government by the people. Poll after poll shows that a majority of all Americans across the political spectrum agree that wealthy donors have too much influence in our elections and in politics. Yet Congress does not yet reflect that broad support of the citizenry. No matter where we come from or what we look like, most of us believe that America was founded on freedom and has thrived through innovation and competition. Unfortunately, today, we have an out of balance system where billionaires and big corporations have voices. Wealthy donors and elites use their power to divide and distract us, keeping our best and brightest from running for office while they push for policies to help themselves and the donors. We can come together across party lines. That's the goal here, to come together across party lines to pass the For Our Freedom Amendment and shape the future we want through invention and innovation where everyone's voice is heard. The cross-partisan candidate panel we hosted in March 2022 demonstrated a common thread of concerns by Libertarian, Democrat, Republican, and Green Party candidates who participated. They all agreed on the problem of overwhelming power of money in our politics and the solution of a constitutional amendment to correct it. Tonight, we're focusing on the conservative candidates. 3 conservative New Jersey candidates will discuss their perspectives on the unlimited political spending in our elections and our representation in Washington. They will also share their experiences in dealing with the daunting hurdles of campaign fundraising. Our esteemed panelists tonight are Trevor Ferrigno, Together We Stand Party for NJ5. Please give us a quick wave. Damon Galdo, there you go, Damon. Republican Party primary candidate for NJ1. Please give us a wave. And Gregg Mele, have I pronounced your name right? Mele?
Mele, but close.
Really? Okay. Republican Party announced candidate for the US Senate in 2024. Our agenda tonight will start with a brief overview of the issue of unlimited money in politics. That'll be given by Marie. Then our panelists will share their perspectives and experiences from the campaign trail, followed by, after that, a chance for you to ask your questions. We'll then talk about the constitutional fix that American Promise works towards and how you can help, but also how candidates and elected lawmakers are needed to help better represent we the people again. We will wrap up with a little more Q&A and make sure that whatever you want to know, we've answered. Now I'd like to pass the baton to Marie Henselder-Kimmel, who will give a brief overview of the problem of money in politics. Marie?
Good evening, and thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides to share with you. How's that? Is that showing up okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so American Promise is, as it says, a cross-partisan nonprofit organization to empower citizen advocacy action in all 50 states to pass the For Our Freedom Amendment to get big money out of politics in order that we the people, not money, govern. This is the problem in a nutshell. This election survey has been done, the American National Election Survey of the Pew Research Center, every presidential year going back to, as you can see, 1964. Unfortunately, the lines are both the same color, but over on the left-hand side, the top line starting there is the number of people who answered that government is run for the benefit of all the people. And the bottom is the number of people who felt that government was run for a few big interests. And as you can see, in the late 60s, early 70s, those lines crossed. More and more people believed that the government was run for a few big interests. And it makes sense, right? What was going on at the time? Vietnam and Watergate, two huge turmoils in our politics in our nation. But unfortunately, as you can see, the people who believe that the government is run to benefit a few big interests has only skyrocketed from about that 50% mark way back then till, mostly the 60s and the 70s percentages. But in 2018 and 2020, those numbers are broaching and surpassing the 90% level of people. And I guess the question that we have is, well, why? A study was done back in the early 2010, 2014. Actually, one of the investigators was here in Princeton. And if you look at the slide, an ideal representative government would be the gray line right up the middle. As if nobody supports something, it should not be passed. If 100% of the population support it, it should be 100% chance passed. So it should be pretty linear in an ideal world. We know it's not ideal. The problem is that the bottom 90% of the population by wealth, they basically have a 30% chance of the policies that they favor being actually put into legislation, no matter whether they have low support for it, which is on the left-hand side, or very high support for it, which is on the right-hand side. Unfortunately, too, the top 10% or the elite donors have a little bit of a more linear representation, that if they have higher support, they have a much better chance of getting those things actually passed into law. And that, when the great majority of we the people see that what we support is not enacted, but what the policies are that the wealthy and the big donors and the dark money support does get enacted, that just makes everyone skeptical, and it makes us feel like our government doesn't work for us. What we're here, our ultimate goal in American Promise nationally and American Promise New Jersey, is to fix this problem of the money in politics with the 4R Freedom Constitutional Amendment. And the goal of the amendment is that it will restore the rights of Americans to regulate election money, to protect our free speech, to protect our representation, to be represented by people like ourselves, to protect our communities and our states from systemic corruption. Because we all know the more money there is around, the more chances that there's something unseemly going on. The problem in 2020 is that over $14 billion was spent on elections. And that doubled what was spent in 2016 on the entire election, presidential and congressional. In addition, only 12 mega donors represented $1 out of every $13 spent in that election. And countless of other dollars that are spent in what's called dark money groups, where it's just essentially they are secret sources of money that they don't have to report who their donors are. And they can spend their money outside of what's called outside spending. In other words, it's not money that they hand to Representative Smith or Jones. They take the money and they buy an ad and put it on TV, or they put out, commercials on the digital commercials on social media, or send out mailings, or do other things to get their views or their candidate through the race. So you and I, who don't spend as much money, don't really wind up having as much say. And this was, I thought, a great political cartoon. The unlimited special interest cash are just a tsunami of money crashing over us, trying to have campaigns and elections that are free of influence and corruption. This is another sort of a little bit more of a demonstration, the 2020 money in comparison to the 2016 money. and the 2012 and the 2008 money. So you can see that the orange is congressional. That has increased even more drastically, but the presidential money has also significantly increased. So this dark money, this secret money, between 2010 and 2020, to the best that it could be tracked, there was just a little under $1 billion spent in that 10 years. But in 2020, there was $1 billion spent in just that election alone. And these are the top groups that were known to spend the money. Believe me, there are other groups out there that it's really hard to tell if they're even spending, but these are the ones that can be tracked. And opensecrets.org is a great nonpartisan source if you ever want to dig into any of this information. So as you can see, there's a mix. There's red are Republican and conservative, blue is Democratic and liberal leaning. Some are purple, National Association of Realtors. There's a mix of these groups. The key thing to know is both sides. And initially, I'm going to go back for a second here. Initially in 2010, sorry, this should be going the other way. Initially in 2010, when some of the biggest Supreme Court decisions came down allowing this unlimited money, there used to be a cap. And they said in the 2010 Citizens United decision, they said, well, if the money is spent outside of the election, if you don't actually hand it to the candidate, then that's not corrupt. That wouldn't cause corruption. So the money on the outside can be spent as much as possible, as much as you want. The limits of how much you can actually give to a donor directly to say how their message gets out, that's limited. But how the wealthy and the special corporations and the unions and the foreign influencers, they can spend outside of the election process for the campaign as much as they want. Initially in 2010 to really up to almost 2018, the conservative outside spending really was winning the race. In 2018, the tables turned a little bit and the liberal money caught up. And the 2018 elections, the midterms, the money was just about equal between both sides. But in 2020, and I do have a slide to show it, the liberal side money outspent by a 2-to-1 ratio, the conservative side money. This is a demonstration of how not only is it money outside of the candidate's control, it's money from outside of the state, outside of the area where the election is being run. These are the Senate races. It's a little easier to show this. These are the big Senate races in 2020. And where the orange is the money the candidate actually spent, and the yellow is the money that came in from outside of the state and obviously from outside of the candidate to spend in that particular election. Georgia was notorious. You know, there were 2 elections in Georgia and each one was in this 250 million. So almost $500 million was spent on the 2 Georgia elections for Senate in 2020. And numerous other ones you can see. North Carolina, there was a lot of money spent. Iowa, Montana, Maine didn't even really make the top 5. Here's the other Georgia, the Warnock and the Ossoff race. Arizona, it was still a lot of money, but the outside spending did not, it was only half of what the candidate spent. South Carolina, a lot of money spent by the candidate, but still a significant, almost $50 million spent of outside money. So that means that the people in the state don't really get to have the loudest voice in what's going on in the election. People that have national interests are coming in and spending money to try to elect the candidate that they think is going to help them on a national basis, not necessarily who's going to help the people of the state itself. So here's that slide demonstrating the change in dominance of the money from the conservative side to the liberal side here, in 2020 in particular. An important thing on the left-hand side is that the wealthy, that means donations of more than $200, less than 1% of our entire population makes political donations of more than $200. Makes sense. A lot of people are just trying to scrap from paycheck to paycheck. They don't have extra money to send to politics, right? So that less than 1% gives more than 70% of all the money. And the individual small donors have increased in the last 4 or 5 years which is a little bit out of, what the pattern was, but overall it comes from the wealthy. And this is what happens to unfortunately, to our candidates with us tonight. This is what happens to the average cost of running a winning House race between 2008 and 2020. 2008, it was 1.3 million. 2010 was the Citizens United decision. It didn't quite start going up for a couple years, but then in these last 4 years, it's just skyrocketed to 2.3 million. And that's just an average. And again, Senate seats, Greg, you're facing this for 2024, 8.5 million in 2008, and by 2020, 27.1 million as an average. So these are just the names of some of the Supreme Court decisions. And, the Supreme Court does the best job it can. It has certain theories that it works on. It has precedents that it works on. But they came up with a theory over the course of these decisions that money is speech for people that own corporations and that have a lot of money. Money is speech. So money is being spent and it should be unlimited because we have a First Amendment right to free speech. The problem is that the free speech of those of us without a lot of money that's being completely squelched, that's not being considered. And we think that overall, the Supreme Court got it wrong when they thought, oh, well, just having a Federal Election Commission tracking this money, that'll keep it under control. It hasn't kept it under control at all, as we can say. So super PACs in particular, they have unlimited, that allows corporations to spend unlimited, particularly. That was enacted basically between the 2010 Citizens United decision and the 2010 Speech Now. This is a district court decision, actually. So back to this idea of for our freedom, we see that the people, the majority of people, we really don't have free speech. Our speech is squashed. What we would like in our own elections is being squashed by the big spenders and the special interests and even foreign money that's can get snuck in by these secret sources. And it is snuck in through the secret sources. Our representation, it's hard for moderate income candidates to run. And we're going to hear from our candidates tonight about what problems they have faced in terms of the hurdles of money. Our communities find it difficult to actually get their own interests represented because special interests have a lot of money. And so when you have a donor that comes along and provides a lot of money to you to run your very expensive race, they tend to have your ear a little bit more than somebody who's just, going to shake their hand and give you one vote. And our state's from systemic corruption, as we just talked about, in terms of the out-of-state spending. So that's my little spiel, and we're going to turn it over back to Joan to introduce the candidates.
Myself, I'm on now. Okay. So thanks, Marie. Have you ever considered how the tremendous challenges that affect those people like our panelists who want to throw their hat in the ring as new candidates for elected office? Now we're honored to have our three panelists share their real-world experiences with the impact of money on their political campaigns. So I'd like to introduce the candidates, give a brief bio on them, and then we'll go to each panelist who will have up to 7 minutes to give their thoughts and perspectives. After that, we'll have Q&A. So first, we have Trevor Ferrigno, 2022 Together We Stand, general election candidate from New Jersey District 5. Trevor is a lifelong resident of New Jersey, currently living in Fair Lawn with his family. He pursued a career path in which he gained varied experience in finance, accounting, consulting, sales, and entrepreneurship. And in 2017, Trevor spent a little over a year helping victims of Hurricanes Harvey and Maria in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. He's currently the accounting manager for a large civil engineering company. and he was motivated by love for his country to stand up for the people of New Jersey 5. Second panelist, Damon Galdo, was born in Philadelphia, a 2022 Republican primary candidate from NJ1. Born in Philadelphia, has lived in the metropolitan Philadelphia area on both sides of the bridge for the last 20 years and is currently residing in West Deptford, New Jersey. He's a husband and father and union carpenter and construction superintendent. He worked in drug and alcohol addiction counseling for 6 years prior to his entry to the construction field and still volunteers his time in the program. Damon's concern for the future of his children and the country led him to run for office for the first time this year. He believes that our system is broken and the Washington insiders have failed. He believes that it's crucial to bring the voices of everyday people to Washington and to solve our nation's problems. And Gregg announced, Mele, right? I got it right that time, good. Announced that he's going to run for the US Senate in 2024 to represent New Jersey. Gregg was a Libertarian candidate for governor in 2021 and ran as an independent for New Jersey Congressional District 7 in 2018. He's a lifelong resident of New Jersey. He obtained his MBA in finance and economics from Baruch College of the City University of New York and his JD from New York Law School. Gregg has practiced law in Clark, New Jersey for 20 years, and he's passionate about restoring liberty and freedom to the state. We thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight to participate in our candidate forum. We have asked our panelists to address two main questions in their remarks. Basically, how has money in politics affected your decision to run for office and the way you have conducted your campaign? That's first. Second, and why do you think conservatives should support the advancement of an amendment to enable Congress and the Senate and the states to place reasonable limits on political donations and spending? Why do you think it's important for us to have a solution? This is how we'll keep the sessions running smoothly. Each panelist has up to 7 minutes to share their remarks. I'll give a verbal notice when there's 1 minute left in the allotted time and a final time's up. After the panelists share their perspectives, we'll have a Q&A session and field questions for the panelists. Please put your questions in the chat and direct them to everyone in the chat so that all the hosts will see them. And as you think of them, and include the candidate's name if you have a specific candidate you want to direct the question to. We'll hear first from Trevor, followed by Damon, and then by Gregg. Okay, Trevor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joan. I just wanted to, firstly start off, introduce myself. My name is Trevor Ferrigno. As Joan said, I'm an independent candidate for Congress in New Jersey's 5th District. Right off the bat, I want to acknowledge the hard work and the effort that the American Promise team put into getting this event together. And I really sincerely thank you for inviting me to the panel. As an independent candidate, the lack of media response to inquiry has really been eye-opening for me. And I appreciate the opportunity to reach the voters of District 5 and New Jersey. So money in politics, or my lack of money for that matter, has caused me to be strategic and resilient in my campaign. In today's world, money and resources go hand in hand. In a practical sense, the real impact that minimal funding has had on my campaign is the inability to passively reach voters through TV, radio ads, hiring call centers, and purchasing spam dialers like my opponents do. The intangible impact that's been on my campaign is that mainstream networks like News 12, the Bergen Record, Community News, won't even return my calls or my emails regarding requests for coverage. The combination of both the real limits of costly advertising and the intangible limits of journalistic bias have forced me to become creative. I've been wearing many operational hats that other candidates pay staff to do. I've tapped the resources of my personal network, And the videos that I make are all scripted, scouted, and produced by me with the help of a good friend. My media strategy is planned, cued, and implemented by me with the help of another good friend. My online presence, including my website, social media, are all created, written, and updated by me. As is the case with any startup, I'm pressed for time and resources, and this forces me to be efficient. Resources, though, are not only real things like cash and equipment, but they're also intangible things like time and influence. Trading our time for money is one of the most fundamental sacrifices we make as adults. And as the value of our money decreases with inflation, which we're all feeling recently, the time needed to earn the same net value of that money increases. Individuals like myself lose the opportunity to do things that may otherwise benefit my community or my country because I have to trade more of my time to obtain the same amount of value so I can continue to provide for myself and my family. This was a critical factor in my decision to run, but I decided to forge ahead despite the reality that the time and effort I put into running my campaign is a direct opportunity loss to build a small business, further my education, or otherwise invest directly in my family's future. However, if I'm successful here, then the dividends of my efforts could pay a much larger return for my community, for my state, and my country. Something else even more critical, though, is the mindset that you don't quit when you hit your first obstacle. You find solutions to your problems and you keep pushing forward because you really believe in what you're doing. As far as the support for an amendment to the solution for corruption in political spending, our Federalist Republic, in our Federalist Republic, the greatest defense against corruption at the federal level is to maximize the authority retained by the people, to preserve our state's sovereignty, and to minimize the power held at the federal level of government. Our founders knew that, and that is one of the biggest reasons they feared unbridled democracy. This is why the Constitution was written to preserve the majority of power to the people and to the states. Recently, it's become painfully obvious that since the turn of the 20th century, the federal government has grown to a proportion never even imagined by our founders. And even today, the federal government seeks to take more authority from the people while promising benefits to the people that they've been providing for themselves for 246 years. Perhaps an amendment is an option, but I think even more important is accountability. And that's where the FEC disclosures comes in. And ultimately, it's up to us, the people and the voters, to know where the donations for these candidates come from and to not just vote party lines because we've been convinced to do so. Over the years, there have been numerous laws passed by Congress in an attempt to prevent undue influence, corruption, and improper campaign financing. And I think we all see where that's gotten us, right? It hasn't really done much. It's my opinion that civil laws only go as far as lawmakers allow them to. And they know at the onset how exactly they plan to skirt around these laws. It's quite easy for lawmakers to repeal and revise laws that were created, and oftentimes these revisions are sold as enhancements or clarifications, but they only end up creating more gray areas and ambiguity to be exploited. The only body that can truly enforce anti-corruption policy is the citizenry, and that's dependent on honest journalism is a key part of that equation. The main method for the people to learn about what's happening is through the work of honest journalism, and that's why the First Amendment guarantees the right to the free press. However, when ownership and control of most media outlets are condensed to the very same group of individuals primarily guilty of this type of corruption, honest reporting is not likely, and it's downright coercive. And it's downright coercive to the extent that it does the opposite of expose the truth. It actually buries it. I think the key to successfully preventing corruption is to make it so that individuals found guilty of violating donation laws are penalized to such a degree that the risk of being caught outweighs the benefits of issuing bribes. Representatives found guilty should be permanently disbarred from holding public office and imprisoned for a term that's so severe that no amount of monetary compensation would ever be worth that price. This issue is not a new one, and it's been discussed in Congress for over 100 years. In the 61st Congress back in 1910, William Rucker of Missouri said right on the House floor that in recent years, elections have been swayed and controlled by the criminal use of money. One of the crying evils of the hour is that people seeking high places.
Just finish your sentence and
Yep. In conclusion, today representatives don't spend thousands of dollars; they spend millions of dollars. And as was then, as we should now, the public have the responsibility to know what these individuals spend and not just vote party lines because we think they should. It's up to us to hold them accountable at the ballot box. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay, now, okay, a time for Damon. And Damon, please take the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Damon Galdo, and like I said, I'm originally from Philadelphia. Just moved to West Deptford about a year ago, but I spent time in between back and forth Jersey and Pennsylvania. I met my wife when I first moved to New Jersey. Then we moved back to Philadelphia because of my work. Because as you know, I'm a union carpenter, construction superintendent, and that's where the bulk of the work was. But I moved to Philadelphia, and then they sent me up to North Jersey to build municipal buildings. So it kind of swapped. It's kind of funny, but obviously, being on here with you guys tonight, I believe in the fairness to the people that want to seek public office. That there should be limits on contributions to campaigns, and those limits, or at the very least, the dark money that we talked about, the very least, it should be able to be showed. That it should be open to the public to see where it came from and why. As I said before, when I talked to you, I never aspired to be a politician, and it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I love my job. I love building commercial buildings. But once I had my daughter and then my son, my daughter's going to be 9, my son is 4. I started paying attention more and more to where our country was heading, and got more involved in politics. And I'll go a little different route than Trevor because he laid it out pretty good. I'll give it to him. He did. But what happened was a buddy of mine, he challenged me to run for Congress. He said, "I'm tired of hearing you talk about it. I'm tired of hearing you complain about politics and everything." As he said, "I'll make you a great website if you run for Congress." I said, "There's no way I'm running for Congress. I like what I do. I'm not trying to get involved in politics whatsoever. I just looking at it and I don't just like the way it's going." He said, "Well, then if you don't like the way it's going, then do something about it." And I go back to, an old quote from Edmund Burke, like, the only thing for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. And that's probably ad-libbing a little bit, but not going, biblical or anything like that. But it's just, if you see something bad, you need to do something. You need to step up and do something. And regular citizens should be able to do that, and not being able and having that dark money and that PAC money, the super PAC money going and not knowing where it's coming from. I mean, it prohibits normal people that want to do good and change things for the future of their children. And that's the main reason why I did this. I'm not gonna lie, I actually had fun with it, and I really got involved more and more and more. And I just like I said, I just want a future for my children. And the problem is that all that money donated to one candidate, they're beholden to their donors. So they leave their constituents behind. The ones that voted them in, the ones that got them elected and trusted them to do what they're supposed to do and represent them. And But when you receive that much donor money, especially from where you don't know where it's coming from, then they're beholden to what that is. And I think the American people should know what that is, what their interests are, why they're doing it. So, just to not confuse anybody, I'm a member of the Carpenters Union, and like I said before, some people might call that an oxymoron because I'm a Republican and conservative. But I do believe in unions. I do. And I believe in PACs as well. Like, I pay into Political Action Committee myself. It comes out of my union dues. And that is used for, there are limits to what my union can donate to a campaign or donate to a candidate, as well as, an individual can. But a super PAC, not so much. They can put as much money into it as they can. And I know it's not supposed to be connected to the candidate, but if you really believe that that they're not handling that, they're not involved on where that money goes and what is said, what ads that are run for them, especially a high profile candidate, there's no way that they definitely are. So I do believe in the PACs. I think they're good because they represent a group of people. But when it gets into, like I said, dark money, where you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know what the group of people represents. And I think everyone needs to be out in the forefront, and all that information should be public, so you know where it's coming from. You know where, if I say I vote for somebody and I believe them that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, but they don't, because they're beholden to their donors. That's just a problem for me. It's just I'm sorry, I'm just like trying to get into this whole thing, and I'm not a very good speaker. I'm a construction guy, so I'm trying not to curse. You know what I mean? When I'm on the job site, you just want to just start cursing and it just flies out of your mouth. So I'm trying not to.
1 minute, Damon. The curses or not? 1 minute.
But no, even like in 1944, when the first PAC was enacted by the CIO. Now, I think they had very good interest in what it was for, and I believe in that, but it was taken advantage of over the years. So then turned what was it, 2010, the super PAC, and that dark money started flowing in, and they approved that you can, anybody could donate, and so that's another problem. So I don't know. I just really appreciate you guys having me on. First of all, I should have said that to begin with, and I apologize from earlier that I had to sit outside because my kids were running rampant and going nuts.
Time.
But I want to thank you guys very much for everything. So and yeah, I know I absolutely believe in the First Amendment. And that's where that super PAC thing came from. It was ruled that the free speech clause of the First Amendment prohibited government from restricting independent contributions or expenditures. But
we'll have a chance to get into that a little bit in the Q&A.
Yeah, the Supreme Court's not always right, but it just gives them an open bank account. That's their limit, and that shouldn't be where it is. It should be limited to the little guy, somebody like me, where I funded my own campaign. I do well for myself in construction, but I'm not rich. And I funded. What's that?
Okay.
Did I lose you?
No. We just called your time. That's all. There'll be more chances for you to answer questions and answers.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Damon.
Sure.
Now we're going to move it on to Gregg. And as we said, announced Republican candidate for Senate in 2024. Gregg?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you to everyone at American Promise for putting all this together. Tremendous amount of work. Thank you also to the fellow panelists. I know intimately the sacrifices, the effort, and all the other pain that comes with running. So I applaud anyone who was willing to step up for that, and Damon, good self-control. All right. So, as far as just quick background, I am in a second marriage. We have kids on, both from first marriages. My girls are 32 and 30, and my stepsons are 29, 27, and 19. We got one left still in college. But actually, last year, we welcomed my first grandchild, my granddaughter, to the world, and another is on the way later this year. So a little different stage for me than perhaps the other gents, but still the same concerns. What are we leaving for our children, grandchildren, and so on down the line? As far as the first area of focus, how does the big money affect the decision to run? For me, it doesn't affect that at all. I would run no matter how hard it is, based on what I just talked about as far as my family situation. For them, I would sacrifice quite a bit. And so the decision to run is not the issue. The effectiveness of a campaign based on how the money structure is really the difficult part. I've had a few runs like we've talked about. Each time I have added more components to my campaign until last year's campaign actually was a full-blown campaign team. Well, the fundraising, the events I did, it was a governor's race. I did 2 21 county tours in New Jersey, and over 100 stops overall, which for a third party at that point, I had switched over to Libertarian for the last few years until this year, coming back to the Republicans. Usually they would get to a half a dozen events in a whole campaign year. And now I see a lot more independent and third party folks this year doing the multi-stop campaigns that certainly I pushed for, and I did everything I could to push my way into as many events as possible last year, and going to start that all over again now this time. So the ability to hire staff, of course, is affected by the money you have. Also, debate access and media access, of course, is hindered quite a bit if you don't have a large amount of capital. Last year, I had managed to get about a month or so of radio advertising fundraised, and also several events that I was able to either attend or put together that I wouldn't be invited to otherwise. There is, as far as media, at least as far as I've ever seen my own staff or anyone else's staff trying to get either press releases or access to any kind of broadcasts for a panel like this in the mainstream media. The first question, well, how much money have you raised? And they take that as the sole measure of your impact to people, as if everyone has the same opportunity to at least even ask the entire world of voters to donate. A lot of people don't hear about you because of the slanted access. And so, of course, you can't raise that kind of money that some of the other candidates are, who are in the mainstream, who are being reported on and invited to things. So it's a great hindrance. It takes a lot of chipping away. I have always seen my efforts as a multi-year process. I thought that it would take several times around to be able to get noticed enough, to be taken seriously by enough people to get that critical mass to really start making an impact. Although occasionally I do happily walk down the street and someone says, "You're Gregg Mele, right? I heard about you last year." So every once in a while I get that name recognition, which is kind of nice. It helps that it was a statewide race. And I guess that's also why I kind of lean toward the senatorial race coming up in a couple of years. My pockets of support are spread out more than concentrated. So working on that though, and I'm giving myself a lot of lead time to do so. So hopefully by 24, a lot more of you guys will hear a lot more about what I'm trying to do in my campaign efforts. But as far as the control of the money in politics, the federal versus state in particular, I mean, I agree with the earlier comment that really it is states' rights. It's 10th Amendment as far as the Fed should have nothing to do with the election process, and certainly should have a far back seat, if anything at all, in terms of monetary policy regarding politics. As for the states, I mean, if it were a different world, perhaps no money in politics would be kind of an ideal, and equal access to things like media for any candidate who meets the requirements to be on a ballot or something like that. But I also have issue being a small government conservative with the idea of the government sort of, or with the election process, forcing anything like the mainstream media to give time equally. So to the extent that money has to be a factor, I think the main thing is that I try to promote is, and it may still be an ideal, but any donations are made to an office being sought as opposed to a candidate, so that all the candidates for that office share equally in what is donated by the private sector. I think that would be a great start to equalizing the playing field. Hard to see how soon it could be achieved, but I think that's at least in the right direction. Hopefully we'll find a solution that works. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks for sharing your experiences, Gregg. And it's now time for questions and answers. Now's the chance for our audience to deepen your knowledge by having your questions answered. We'll address questions already in the chat. And also, I think we're in a situation where people can raise hands, yes, if they wish to. And again, put your questions in the chat at everyone, and that way all of the hosts will see it. And indicate which panelist you'd like to answer your question. So you can use your raise your hand function under reactions. Please remember to unmute yourself if we call on you. So Carolyn, do we have any questions in the chat?
I am scanning the chat right now, but I'm seeing a lot of comments, not so much in the way of questions.
We have Nancy.
Nancy has one down, yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nancy Morgan from Virginia, and this is really interesting discussion. And I was trying to get one of our Republican governors to to support getting money out of politics. And he raised the issue saying, well, you know, as a conservative, I really believe that money is speech. And I was wondering, as conservatives, how do you deal with that statement? It's such a blanket statement, and it's very difficult to find an answer to that.
Do you want to each take a shot at that one, or is there someone specific you want to?
Yeah, I think it would be good, you know, because when you talk about getting money out of politics, a lot of times conservatives, that's their blanket answer. So I would be interested in hearing how do you respond to that?
I mean, if I can just throw in, I mean, I would respond that money controls speech. It isn't speech. And I don't understand why it's so hard to grasp that it really can be made to shut out other candidates. I also have heard stories over time about candidates with a lot of money having an organization or a machine that threatens donors to other candidates to keep them from getting the monetary access to be able to keep the level playing field otherwise. So it's really something that has to be much more even. And like I was saying earlier, a little bit.
Do any of the other panelists want to jump in and address Nancy's question? Trevor?
Sure. Yes. Oh, go ahead, Damon. Go right ahead.
Oh, Damon? Okay.
I completely agree with what he said, that money does control speech. And it's just a sad part about that money makes the world go round. And again, that's why we're here tonight talking about campaign donations, and like for the small guy that has to fund their own campaign, they don't have the money to go out there to make their voices heard. They have to do it the hard way, to go knock on doors and speak to people. And I mean, maybe do it through social media, but they can't afford commercials and stuff like that. So he put it well. That was a great answer, and that is the problem. Money is speech because it controls it, and that's why we're here tonight.
Thank you, Damon. Trevor, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay.
Sure, yes. So Nancy, thanks for the question. And this question drives right to the heart of the Citizens United versus the FEC case in 2008, right? And this is the key example of that question. And I do agree that money for ads is certainly a method of speech. And just because somebody has the ability to pay for an expensive ad shouldn't necessarily preclude them from being able to run the ad, right? I mean, that is their right. And when you get into a scenario that the government has the authority to tell an individual, no, you can't speak, no, you can't run that ad, I find that the risk outweighs the reward in that sense, right? But however, in today's arena, marketers call running ads and doing things like that cutting through the noise, right? And ultimately what it means is targeting your market, right? Reaching the people, because ultimately it's up to us to respond to these ads, right? It's up to us to watch the television. It's up to us to buy the widgets, right, that they're selling. In this case, it's elections. And in the case of elections, it's up to us to know who these representatives are and not just who they present themselves to be in a 30-second ad, right? Because anybody can look great in a 30-second ad. It's up to us to really look at the disclosures, look at who those donors are, look at their voting record, and make a decision on who to vote for, not because we're a registered party member or because, you know, there was a cute dog that ran up to this, you know, this candidate in an ad. It's up to us to hold our representatives accountable, like Article 1 of the Constitution allows us to do for the House every 2 years, and look at the truth and not be persuaded by buttons and hats and commercials and smiling faces, and look at their records and hold them accountable for what they stand for, what they vote for, and what they actually do when the cameras are off and the microphones are muted.
Thank you, Trevor. I just want to mention before I kick it over to Carolyn again for any more questions or that it's going on 5 of 8 now. We've led this to be, we've marked this to be an hour meeting. We're happy to stay, and if the panelists are happy to stay a little bit longer, and anybody who's here is welcome if you want to, because I think there's more that we want to hear. So, okay, Carolyn, anything else?
Trevor, I just want to confirm, Greg had put a thumbs up, but Trevor and Damon, are you okay if we go to like 10:15 after? Yeah, okay, great.
3 thumbs up. There is a question here from a person named Marie.
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up on Trevor's comment. So Trevor, you know, I get like, so it sounds almost like buyer beware. You the citizen, the onus is on you to try to break through the noise and try to dig through the websites to figure out where the money's coming from and who's putting out the message. But the messages it isn't clear who's putting the money behind the message. Usually the name on the end, like I'll just preview a little bit of what I was going to say in my last little bit about the amendment, is that now if a commercial or an ad is coming from the candidate, because at the end there's a disclaimer, hi, I'm Jane Smith and I approve this message. When it's not from the candidate, when it's outside spending, all you get is that all those lines, you know, this is ABC in favor of America and patriotism and apple pie company, and you don't know where the money came from. And literally the names are like that, right? You have to look at it real quick and see what the name is. And you have no idea what they stand for. I've looked up who money's coming from and some of those things. And it's about, like there's one right now that has teachers and regular workers. It's from American Edge. Well, who's American Edge? American Edge is Google and all these big mega platforms saying, don't let Congress interrupt all the money that we're getting off of the internet. So it's very difficult for common citizens to know that. Shouldn't there be some more disclosure that has to be made so that it's more easy for people to know where the money's coming from and who's trying to get them to vote that way? We have fraud laws. We can't deceive customers in our businesses, right? What do you say to that?
Yes. So absolutely. Is it easy to find out who these organizations are? No, sometimes it's not, right? And some information that I had sent, to Joan earlier, there used to be laws on the books many, many years ago, right? And back in, I believe it was in 1910, there was laws passed that were specifically addressed in the U.S. Code to prevent corruption in the federal government. And then later on in 1925, they were revised and repealed. And then in 1948, they were revised and repealed even more, right? And so this is kind of the issue that I was running into, is that the laws are going to be revised and repealed. As time goes on, people forget and things get, again, revised and repealed to make things more gray and more ambiguous. But for me, as a voter, because again, like Damon said, this wasn't something that I wanted to do. I just complained a lot and people said, well, why don't you do something about it? And I said, well, okay, well, maybe I will, right? But as a voter, it is hard to find out who the donors are. And that's why I really look to the voting records to see what the representatives have actually voted for and how they represent it, right? Because it's really interesting, because if you look at the most recent thing with the Inflation Reduction Act, how they sell you an act is, I think, really indicative of what their true intentions are, right? But you have to read it. The onus really has to be on the individual. And unfortunately, in a society or in an arena where information is so readily available, it's hard to find the good information. And to directly answer the question, perhaps instead of saying you have to disclose or put tiny print on a tiny ad that nobody can read and it flashes on the screen for less than a second, maybe there's some regulations that says no. There's font regulations or time regulations. And maybe one other way to do it too is you have to run 30 seconds of just who donated to your campaign or just who is sponsoring the ad, and force these people to spend a whole lot of money on just telling people who paid for the advertisement. And that might actually prevent them from running the advertisement in the first place, right?
Great, yeah. So if we I don't see any other questions in the chat, maybe we'll go ahead and I'll do the wrap up for the amendment.
Sorry, did I see one directed to me in the chat?
Yeah, there is one directed at you.
Oh, actually, yeah, Greg, I did have one before I came up with my other one.
Okay, yeah. If I could just address for a minute, because I find it interesting.
Let me just find where can you say what it was? Oh, how should national donors and foreign donors be controlled in your view?
Yeah, and that was my 8th minute if I had. So
now you have it.
I mean, foreign donor, I mean, that should be totally barred. I mean, in my mind, by definition, anyone outside the U.S. has interests that don't align with the U.S. I don't see how you get around that argument from a logical standpoint. So I feel that that's where some of the influence peddling comes from. That is also a major problem in a few areas. So that I think should be eliminated. As far as national donors, I mean, yeah, if you're talking about, for example, people outside New Jersey donating to any of our campaigns, I mean, they don't have a direct interest in it. And, it really should be the voting public that's eligible that can donate to the candidates that are running in their areas. I don't like the idea that people who have no impact from the decision of who gets in office, you know, influencing that decision by influencing how, you know, whose, I should say, message gets out more than others.
And so, I would say that they do have, like, for instance, and you know, this is a limited conversation, an hour, a little bit more than an hour. We can't get into a lot of details that we could get into if we had more time, but I just saw some data that the Georgia Senate race between Warnock and Walker right now, that between, I forget which one is which, but one of them, 60% of their fundraising so far has been out of state, and the other one, 90% of their fundraising so far has been out of state, coming from outside the state of Georgia. And there's a reason why, because those people do have an interest, whether they want to affect the control of the Senate, or they want to affect, you know, the outcome of some particular policy fight. They have a dog in the fight, but it's not the interests of the citizens of the state of Georgia.
Right.
So that's where, you know, maybe, and that's exactly what I'm going to go into next, where we at American Promise, and I'll just slip into the slides if we.
Maybe I should just, since I think that was the last question in there, I'll just zip right into my introduction of you. Okay. Marie?
Okay. Well, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, Marie's going to present the constitutional solution that we're working for on an American Promise. Marie.
Okay, let me just make sure I have my slide set up here first. I had it up and it came away. Here we go. Click. Good, here we go.
And thank you for your questions, participants, and your answers, panelists.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of problems and what the difficulties are for moderately funded candidates. And now let's talk about some upside. The bright side is that there is a groundswell for change. 88% of Americans support fixing this problem of the influence and power that money has in our political system. 75% of Americans across the spectrum support an amendment to get money out of politics, including 65% of Republicans, 70% of independents, and 85% of Democrats. And we in American Promise have a strategy where we look at building local knowledge, like these events that we're having here tonight, including also talking to candidates, getting candidate pledges. When things are a little bit more normal, we do tabling, we go to different other groups and present. We go and have meetings with members of Congress. We have meetings with local lawmakers. We build local support. And then we also try to work on the congressional support, because, you know, the two parts of getting an amendment passed are to get 2/3 of Congress, both in the House and in the Senate, to agree that, yes, this amendment should be passed. And then it gets sent back to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it before it becomes our new amendment. Right now, we're at a situation where 22 states have called for an amendment, and they have the yellow, the yellow stars on them. Active American Promise chapters, are in the blue states. In the other light blue states, there are active leaders, but not necessarily chapters working on it. And then some other states where we don't yet have people really actively working. But our idea is we want to leverage the political support for it among the people to get the Congress to support it, hopefully focused for 2024 or the next Congress, 2025, and then have the situation where the states are ready, the people are ready, and they know they want to go ahead with this so we can get it ratified. The reasons to work on this by an amendment is, as actually Trevor mentioned, 100 years of campaign finance law, because the follow-up to the laws that were passed in the early 1900s. In 1970s, if you remember, after Watergate, there were a number of different laws that actually the law that set up the Federal Election Commission was in the 1970s, and some other laws. And then there was McCain-Feingold in the early 2000s, that when the crux of these Supreme Court changes happened in like 2010-ish, they overturned 100 years of states' campaign finance laws. And if we don't fix it with an amendment, then any particular legislation that gets passed can just be taken apart again, like Trevor mentioned. In the 27 amendments, we have 8 times the amendment has been passed to fix an incorrect Supreme Court ruling, what was viewed incorrect down the line. And this would be one of those types of rulings. And as I just said, more than 75% of Americans support an amendment. The last 2 parts on this slide, federalism. Each state can decide what's best for itself. 24 states had their own, what they had decided best for themselves. And some, like Montana, actually, there was a documentary about 3 years ago about this. It was called Dark Money. And it was about the Republican upon Republican money spent, and how there were some big changeovers in the state legislature. And then the Citizens United decision came down. Their whole thing was based on what they called the copper kings, the copper companies and the railroad companies had taken over the state, basically. And those laws were lost. So that's a move against federalism by that kind of a Supreme Court ruling. And civic trust, when we see that what most Americans support can't get done, or the problems that most Americans have can't be fixed, but the big money and the elite donors get what they want out of government.
Thank you.
We're all, we're all.
Yeah, could I have a door flex when you come back? Okay.
Can you, somebody's talking and maybe mute yourself, thanks. So again, the 4R Freedom Amendment restore the rights of Americans to regulate election money, to protect our free speech so that we can be heard. What we want, what we need in our communities can be heard again, not what the big money donors have. They have speech, but they shouldn't be able to drown us out. If we're having a conversation and a civil discourse, our voices should all be heard, not several loud voices on amplifiers drowning everyone else out. We should be able to have people represent us in Congress that have needs and understand the needs of the people, most of the people in the communities. And then again, our states and all of this, when there's too much money, it's systemic corruption. We have a candidate pledge program this year and every election, major election year. And it's a tool for voters, organizations, and candidates dedicated to fixing our elections and giving all Americans an equal voice. Now, this is a little bit of a story of why we need to work cross-partisanly. Jeff Van Drew, you may or may not know, when he was in the New Jersey Senate, was the primary sponsor of the New Jersey non-binding resolution calling on Congress to pass this amendment. That was back in 2012. And he supported that work all the way through to when he ran for Congress as a Democrat. He signed the pledge in 2018, and he co-sponsored the most supported amendment resolution in Congress at the time. We all know he switched his party to Republican, and afterwards, he has not continued to support the amendment resolution, excuse me, but it's something he had supported for a decade before. Unfortunately, even though across the spectrum in the populace, we all feel the same way, 75% of Americans, and there isn't a party that describes and has ownership of or membership of 75% of Americans. But when it comes to electeds in Congress, for instance, in 2017, 2018, when we first started really working here in a New Jersey chapter, we would meet with Republican congressmen and they'd say, the fundraising is horrendous. It's so difficult to have, these big money interests coming and pushing for something that they want, but I can't put my neck out. I can't speak ahead of the rest of the party. And the party right now is not for this. Because remember what I said, the Republicans were the main donors for the first 7 or 8 years after the Supreme Court decision. But now the money has flipped the other way, and the big money is being spent from the liberal towards the conservative, against the conservatives. And so we really feel like if we can get an amendment resolution passed or introduced, let's put it that way, that reflects Republicans first and gets Republicans on board using language that's a little bit more towards the, the ideas of the Republican Party, still getting the same thing done, allowing the states to control their own decisions about what's best for them for campaign finance and funding elections. But also we feel like nationally, foreign donors and nationally based businesses, there has to be some input by Congress against those donors. It's not that it's going to tell every state what they're going to do with their own regulations in their own state about donors, but the things that have to be done on a national basis, because it's national based, we think that the Congress has to have the ability to pass something. We're not telling them what they have to pass, we're giving them the ability to pass something. So that's a lot of information, but I just want to say, we would love your help. We need to get as many citizens talking about this and talking to their elected and their candidates about this to make sure that we can get our voices heard again in our government. And by signing up For Your Citizens Pledge to get some more information and to say to your congressperson through, we just take your zip code, hey, I'm in support of this. And we can say, hey, Congressman Smith, we have this number of supporters in your district. And then second of all, we are working on getting candidate pledges signed with our candidates. And this link bit.ly.ap/APNJ email is a form that you could fill out to let us know that you'd like to get some information about what we're doing, and also to potentially give us some help in contacting candidates. We've been in touch, Gregg and Damon and Trevor are candidates that we've spoken to, and initially there were 53 candidates for the Republican and Democratic primaries back in June. We reached out to all of them and we had 17 responses who actually signed, and now we're trying to go out and get to all of the independent candidates, and we're working our way through doing that. So the more we can reach, the more support we can get, and hopefully some of them will be elected and will actually go on to Congress and be supporters in Congress too. I think that Carolyn just put both of those links in the chat.
Yes, I did.
Great.
I put the links and I put your email address in case anybody wants to reach out to you.
If you have a specific question for me, please let me know. And why don't we open it up to see if there are any further questions?
Is there anybody else? Thank you, participants and panelists, for staying a little bit later. We're getting ready to wrap up, but if there's anything else that anybody wants to ask of our panelists, please either raise your hand or throw it in the chat real quick.
And if we could, maybe take us off spotlight, and maybe we could all unmute and say a very hearty thank you to Gregg and Trevor and Damon, not only for being here to speak to us tonight, but also for putting their hat in the ring, because as they've explained to you, it's a big commitment of time and civic dedication to do what they have done and what they are doing. And I really salute them. Thank you so much to all three of you. This is the way we're going to have a better government that really respects, we of, by, and for we the people. That's what we want.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. I just want to end with this. The first that the person asked about money being is speech, but everyone has their own agenda. They need to realize that this is the United States of America. We're not that united. It's not with our president that actually ran on and said he was going to unite the country, but it hasn't happened at all. Going the opposite direction. But I just believe that what the country is founded on, the Judeo-Christian values, everyone just needs to look at everybody and realize that we all live together. And it's all about the population. It's not about an individual. And that's where this stems from. And that's what I believe. Thank you for having me on, and thank you all that joined.
Well, thank you all for coming. And everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody.
Thanks. And if
Appreciate
anybody
all
has
your
a
interest.
question you want to stay on and ask, please do. We'll be hanging on for a minute or two here, a couple minutes.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you guys for having me, putting this together, and thank you for all the people who joined in to listen. Thank you.
Okay.
All righty.
I think we're ready.